Hello and welcome to the Majlis podcast, Radio Free the Liberties current affairs talk show focusing on Central Asia. I'm Mohammed Tahir, host of the Majlis and Radio Free the Liberties media manager here in Washington, D.C. Interesting things are happening in Turkmenistan lately. For the first time on April 25th, state television showed Serdar replace his father's role in a national celebration, the spotlight which local media in previous years have used to glorify the president. It comes just days after Serdar topped the evening news for the first time as media showed him opening a state building housing association. Usually Turkmenistan's evening news is also entirely devoted to the latest activities of the president. This follows another curious decision by Elder Berdimuhamedov in which he added several new members to Halk Maslahati and appointed himself as the speaker of this newly established upper chamber of the parliament. All these comes at a time when unemployment is higher than ever before in recent years. The economy is in trouble and the Turkmen currency losing half of its value against the dollar within a matter of few weeks. News about the severe impact of COVID-19 is leaking out while the government remains in denial. So from whatever direction you look at Turkmenistan, you get this weird feeling of something curious is taking place in this country. But it is unclear to me what's happening, why Elder Berdimuhamedov is taking kind of backseat, and why all this is happening now. So we have a lot to talk about. To discuss all these, I'm joined by three journalists who follow Turkmenistan day and night and are some of the most informed Turkmen experts of our time. Ruslan Matiev, the editor of Alternative Turkmenistan News, who is originally from Turkmenistan, Faruk Yusufi, the director of Radio Free the Liberties Turkmen Service, and Bruce Pannier, the editor of Radio Free the Liberties Central Asia blog, Kishlok Awazi. Thank you very much, colleagues, for joining us today on this very important conversation. But before I get to the topic of the day, I just wanted to highlight one more pressing development that's taking place in Central Asia as we speak, which is the cross-border tension on Tajik-Kyrgyz border. It's not the first time that we are seeing this, but the fact that this remains a source of tension and occasionally and recently more frequently erupts is a matter of serious concern. However, I will stop talking about this tension here because whatever I say about this issue today, it might be an old story by the time the podcast will be out. So we will keep our eyes on it. Perhaps we will get back to this topic in our next episode. So for today, not very tense, but interesting developments are taking place in Turkmenistan lately, as I said. The latest on the list is the impressive traffic of phone calls that Berdimuhamedov is engaged. I guess as we speak, the Uzbek president is there in the country, which was rather surprising. And earlier, phone calls were taken place between Berdimuhamedov and Putin, Rahmon, Erdogan, Tokayev, and President Ghani. Though, as I said earlier, Berdimuhamedov has been taking a back seat, which is true in some ways. Then you have this incredible phone diplomacy. So maybe we can start with you, Bruce. What is really happening?
Well, I mean, for the people of Turkmenistan, pretty much the whole system is failing them, across the board. You mentioned all the problems they got. It's hard to get medical attention for an illness that the government claims doesn't exist. We know from the reporting that both, Faruk's, the Turkmen service, and also what Ruslan has put up too, that, there's all kinds of things that go with this. The doctors obviously know that there's coronavirus in the country, and, you have to pay to get one of the limited beds that are available. People have to pay to get the corpse of their deceased relative out of the hospital. There's lines for bread and basic goods, and now they don't want the lines because the royal son says that it tarnishes his father's image, as if his father didn't do a good enough job tarnishing his own image. Like I said, nothing seems to work, and what the Turkmen government or the president is more worried about all the time lately is what appears to be the transition of power. He's just paying attention to that. So getting him in a position, getting his son in a position.
So that's what you think is happening.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, we'll see what happens in September, but Faruk and Ruslan know better than me that Serdar turns 40 in September, and that's constitutionally that's minimum age to be the president of the country.
So do you think
we'll see? Clearly, he's headed to something bigger than he's even at now. I'm talking about Serdar.
Yeah, jumping from one position to the other. So for this theory, Bruce, is the recent traffic of phone calls adds up anything?
I mean, these are condolence calls for the father. Now, what else they discuss, I don't know, but this is just one of those things you do to call up and say, "I'm sorry to hear your father died." I'm sure every one of those leaders had something else they wanted to talk about while they were on the phone with him, but officially and understandably, that's the reason.
Okay, the nature of Turkmenistan is as such that we will probably never know what's going on until something actually happens. But what I'm thinking about is all of this chit-chat. I'm still kind of obsessed with this. Maybe, Ruslan, you could jump in here. Yeah, Berdimuhamedov's father passed away a couple of days ago, but it cannot be just about that. That's what I'm thinking. I mean, of course, it must be the first thing they say when the conversation starts, but how do you see it? Is there anything more into this?
Yes, I had an interesting conversation with one of my economic sources in Ashgabat, and he asked me to look back on the 20th of April when the Chinese leader sent a letter to Berdimuhamedov. And of course, it was related to the passing of his father, but there was one line that perhaps caused this intensive traffic of phone calls and other things, conversations. It was about the Chinese leader offering a phone call to discuss, bilateral relationships, the Chinese-Turkmen relationships. And perhaps that was like a trigger for all subsequent chats with other leaders, like the president of Kazakhstan, for example, perhaps Russia's president as well. And most likely Shavkat Mirziyoyev's today's visit to Ashgabat also has to do something with it. We know that Turkmenistan is very reliant on the gas supplies to China, and the pipeline goes through the territory of Uzbekistan and Kazakhstan. Perhaps the core lies in that phone call. And perhaps it's related to the Chinese relationships.
Ruslan, would you like to open up that line that you're curious about this in this conversation with the China? And perhaps I missed it, but since you are saying that other telephone calls that followed, this has to do something with the conversation with the Chinese. So what was that caught your attention there?
Well, it was not very much detailed. It was just the fact that the Chinese leader sent a message to the Turkmen president and offered him a telephone call at any convenient time for Berdimuhamedov. It says that so that we can exchange our views on bilateral relationships to give further push to the Chinese-Turkmen relations.
But
that's
basically it is like a diplomatic language that they always use, isn't it? I'm just curious about why this caught your attention.
Well, we all know that Turkmenistan is in difficult economic state at the moment. We also know that China is being Turkmenistan's main gas customer. We know that the construction of the pipeline had cost, if I remember correctly, over $3 billion American dollars. Turkmenistan has debts. So all of these little clues, and the fact that the leader of one of the biggest economies in the world has offered a phone call to discuss these things personally with Berdimuhamedov on the phone, not through ambassadors, not through other diplomats, not through ministries, but directly, perhaps is an important sign.
Interesting. So that phone conversation has not taken place yet, is it?
No, it has not. There was only a proposal. And so the local observers in Ashgabat, they believe that all of the subsequent calls to the other regional leaders, including Russia's president, may be related to that message of the leader of China.
Very interesting, very curious. Earlier, I was talking about this phone traffic with a colleague of ours, Fran Olmos. He's with the Foreign Policy Center in London. So one of his theory was about as Bruce mentioned earlier, about the possible succession. And the other hint that he was thinking about could be perhaps the economic desperation that Turkmenistan is in today. Maybe before I move on, Farooq, let me also take your opinion about this intensive diplomacy that we are talking about. I mean, how you read it.
As Bruce mentioned, that there is this power transition is underway. This is the beginning of the decisive stage of power transition. If you remember, Serdar Berdimuhamedov visited Russia late March or beginning of April, and he accompanied Foreign Minister Rashid Meredov. And right after his return from Russian visits, the president, Berdimuhamedov, appointed him the head of the Turkmen-Russian Cooperation Commission. I mean, he was appointed core chairperson of the commission on the Turkmen side. Of course, we have to look into how Berdimuhamedov was appointing his son and himself to various positions. One is that, of course, it might not play practical role, this position of chairperson of the International Ahalteke Association. But right after his appointment, Serdar suggested that position of the chairperson of the association be renamed into president of the association. So they are playing a lot of this symbolic games and trying the reaction from the public. And of course, the Gurbanguly Berdimuhamedov's appointment of himself as the chairperson of the legislative chamber, I think it all boils down to what we were all talking about over the past year, at least since Berdimuhamedov disappeared for a couple of weeks in July 2019, that the power transition will probably move quite fast. And there were two scenarios. One likely scenario was that Serdar Berdimuhamedov will be elected to the newly established upper chamber and become the chairperson of the upper chamber, Halk Maslahati. And the second variant was that, which was less likely, to be honest, that Berdimuhamedov takes over the chairpersonship of the upper chamber and appoints his son, which I think is what's going on right now. And as Bruce mentioned, in September, Serdar will become eligible to occupy the position of the president. And I think what's happening at the moment is, of course, without support and without the consent, especially of Russia, neither of these scenarios can be carried out. And of course, they need support of Kazakh regime, the Uzbek regime, other players in the region. And I think what's going to happen is that president of Turkmenistan is going to become some sort of a supreme leader of Turkmenistan and appoint his son a president in September or some other position which will be in the second role. And while he's around, he will try to train him. And at the same time, he will try to bring the legislation of the country in accordance to his wishes, that he will appoint his son, and he will probably further ensure that this inheritance of power in Turkmenistan is followed even after Serdar.
Interesting.
And we don't have to go far from what happened like in Uzbekistan when Karimov died and his heir apparent Gulnara Karimova is in prison. While he saw what happened in the neighboring Azerbaijan when Heydar Aliyev trained his son first as prime minister, and then he took over and quite powerful.
It looks like, for a long-term planning, perhaps if we try to read Berdimuhamedov's brain, he might be thinking in these lines for a long-term planning. But speaking of the current moment, is there any reason why Berdimuhamedov would even consider this option? It looks to me that he has time. He enjoys spotlight, being a president. Why Berdimuhamedov even consider to bring up anyone, even his son, position of influence?
Yeah, we saw what happened in 2019. From what we know from our sources, that he was seriously ill when he was absent from the public eye for 2 weeks, if not more. And after that, career of Serdar Berdimuhamedov skyrocketed. And from what we were observing before that, yes, he was not very keen to share the spotlight because he thought that he would live long enough to transfer the power even to his grandson. He's not very old, so he will turn 64, and his father died recently at the age of 88.
Yeah.
I mean, we can only speculate with regimes like Turkmenistan.
Right.
He would expect that he would live another 25 years. But what happened looks that it scared him very, very much.
Okay.
So it's time to think about the future of the family,
Interesting.
if not himself.
Interesting. Bruce, I also wondered your thoughts about this now that we are firmly speculating about the possible succession plan might be in order here behind all these latest developments, including the phone calls. Talking of phone calls, though, first of all, what is your analysis of this possibility? You already mentioned some, but also feel free to add anything you would like to add after Ruslan and Farooq has spoken. And also, how region would view Berdimuhamedov Jr. as a possible successor?
Well, just, as far as the phone calls, I don't think there's never a phone call, even a condolence call that doesn't include a lot of other stuff. And in fact, the reason for calling might be the other stuff. This gives you officially, a very humane reason for connecting or something like that too. But obviously they were talking about other stuff. And who knows? I mean, it could be, it's certainly in the case of Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan, I would imagine another one of the things they would discuss is what's the real situation with COVID in your country, because you're our neighbor. And we're trying to get it out of our country. And as long as if you got it, we're always going to keep getting it. So that would be another part of that. Now, as far as what happens if his son, in the likely event that his son ends up taking his place, again, we don't really know. I should also throw in too that this could look a lot more like a Kazakhstan kind of scenario where Berdimuhamedov is chairman of the Halk Maslahati. They might change the constitution so that has a lot more powers and then move his son over or something like that. But I agree that I think there are health issues at play here that are speeding this up. And he wants to make sure that his son is in and established. So, has experience and has been working out there. If he's not old enough right now, but if Gurbanguly Berdimuhamedov is dead, his son's position is a lot more tenuous at that point. And so let him have power for hopefully the old man, at least in his thinking, stays around for a few more years and watches while his son eases into the position.
So you think
if he's appointed, it's going to be strange for Tajikistan. It'll be great because it sets a precedent for what they want to do. It seems at the same time for Uzbekistan and Kazakhstan, they probably won't care so much as long as there's stability, and they're going to, they're much bigger, so they're always going to be able to not dictate to the Turkmen president, but they can pretty much tell him what they want him to do. A lot of times, it's not an equal relationship. There's no doubt about it. And with a new president, a young guy, I think Mirziyoyev and Tokayev would just take the position that, listen to what we're telling you, young dude. And Kyrgyzstan, I don't know, because Kyrgyz-Turkmen relations, it's not a close partnership or anything. So I don't think they would really care that much about it either.
So you are saying the regions will not care as long as there is stability in the country.
I think that's what a lot of them want.
But what's the guarantee of there will be a stability under this young guy? And also, I'm thinking there might be some other people who might be interested in being in a powerful position in the country. Could Serdar's appointment to this role might open up some sort of a competition? I'm again speculating here, but just again the bottom line being, what's the guarantee of the country will remain stable under this guy?
I don't think there is any guarantee, really. Even if he's in for 3 or 4 years before his dad passes along, or maybe even 10, I think people will take that. There will be some people who want to use the opportunity of Gurbanguly Berdimuhamedov dying to see if they can't do something about power. The scenarios you laid out were really important because if it happens suddenly in the next couple of years and his son is out there, I think it's going to be real questionable how long he's able to stay there. And he could get overthrown from within. In fact, it's almost sure that. You mentioned there's other people inside Turkmenistan that would like to see the Berdimuhamedov family moved out of power. But whatever happens in terms of stability, not just the neighbors, but even Russia, China, and everything wants to make sure that the transition of power does not lead to domestic instability, where the country starts to fall apart and it looks like they're headed towards civil war because they got that long border with Afghanistan. And, you know, a lot of militant groups have already figured out that when you have instability in a country, that's a good place for you to move in, you know, and try to see if you can't etch out some niche there where you can operate from. So no one wants to see instability in the country. But like I said, the Turkmen people must be at the limit with the Berdi Muhamedov family, and it's going to be tough for them to watch this guy come in, if he does, and think we got 20 or 30 more years of the same life.
Yeah. Ruslan, perhaps we are reading too much into this, I'm guessing.
I think we are personalizing Turkmenistan's stability too much. Let's not forget that there are people also behind the scenes, behind the Turkmen politics. Yeah. I mean, in 2006, 2007, when Berdi Muhamedov came to power himself, Gurbanguly, I mean, he was like the least possible candidate. How did he come there? How did he end up taking the president's seat? We don't know. But I just want to say that let's not connect stability to some personality, because it's wider than that. It's deeper than that. It's not only about Serdar. It's about the regime itself. And that is pretty much stable, unfortunately.
Very interesting. Also, while all this is happening, when Turkmenistan's economy is really, really in deep trouble, the impact of COVID-19 and the growing frustration of Turkmens are new additions to existing troubles that this nation has been going through for a long time. This is leading some people to take unprecedented risks to express their anger. A couple of days ago, leaflets were found in Turkmenistan criticizing the president, and manhunt was apparently started. In the meantime, we have been seeing more signs of sporadic protests within Turkmen borders. So with the economy in the gutter, people are upset, frustrated, and the fact that there is no apparent way out of the situation kind of raises the question as to what next for the country. So let's continue the debate talking about these and many other questions very shortly. First, let me recap the conversation that today on the Majlis podcast, I'm joined by Ruslan Matiev, the editor of Alternative Turkmenistan News, Faruk Yusufi, the director of Radio Free Liberties Turkmen Service, Bruce Pannier, the editor of Radio Free Liberties Central Asia blog Kishlak Owazi. I'm Mohammed Tahir, Radio Free Liberties media manager here in Washington, D.C., and we are discussing the current state of affairs in Turkmenistan. So, coming back to the economic well-being of the country, earlier, Bruce, you started your talks with this. In recent days, the Turkmen manat has lost its value by 40% against the dollar. On the top of all what's going on with the economy, this is really, I guess, depressing. Of course, it is not in the nature of authorities to explain or try to remedy this kind of situation. But Faruk, how people are dealing with this situation?
In a nutshell, you can call what's happening in Turkmenistan is that the regime is trying the patience of the people, because people are really being put in a very difficult position. Many public employees, which is probably the majority of people, employed people in Turkmenistan, they are seeing their salaries being cut. On top of that, they are being extorted of money for different reasons. Just today, I think we reported about how teachers are being told to contribute to the state-organized events like Horse and Dog Day and 140th anniversary of Ashgabat. At the end of the school year, academic year, the students are being told to chip in for the reconstruction in the schools. And one of the most symptomatic, I think, was that a report yesterday that the imams in mosques told Muslims that are observing Ramadan at the moment to contribute this charity during Ramadan, the Fitr charity, to the newly established fund, charity fund named after the president. So, not only these public workers who constitute the majority of employed people in Turkmenistan see the wages cut, but they are being extorted, and they're being extorted without any shame on the part of the state. And we see that those big food lines that previously we observed in regions, in provinces, now those food lines are unprecedented even in the capital of Turkmenistan, in Ashgabat. And people are very, very in desperation. They're being tried.
Let me also take Ruslana's point, and that's, Ruslan Farooq mentioned this, the last story that they have done about this queues in front of a shop or something like that in Ashgabat, which authorities have been trying to disperse. So it's crazy even, to think that instead of trying to find a solution or taking measure to resolve this, the cause of this queue, they are kind of trying to disperse. The type of thing that Farooq was talking about, like the wage cut, extortion. Tell us about the human suffering that this is causing in the day-to-day life of people, the way in which they are trying to handle this.
Well, I can say for sure that the number of kids begging money in the streets of Ashgabat and the regions, Dashoguz, for example, we have reported about it, has increased. Kids, some of them are teenagers, some of them are still young, small kids. They beg for money near bazaars. They come to the cars that are standing for the red light, traffic light, and, knock on the window to ask for a manat or two. These scenes we haven't seen even in the Niyazov times. This is a new phenomenon, especially in Ashgabat. Ashgabat was known to be standing somewhere separately. It was much upper, much higher. Everybody wanted to go to Ashgabat to find a job. It was always well off compared to other regions. But it seems that, the hard life, the tough life has reached even the capital, so that kids, teenagers have started to beg money in the streets. For families, it's tough, especially if there's only one breadwinner in the family. That is very rare when two adults in a family both have jobs. It has become very rare because most of the construction sites have paused because there is no money to finance them. The Avaza resort is not welcoming guests anymore because of COVID, and many, many other things. Take the restrictions to travel abroad. It has left very many families literally with no bread, because those families that used to make money by taking food, for example, to Turkey and sell it to the labor migrants in Istanbul, they are jobless. They relied on this job. And these people, usually they don't have higher education. Even if they do, there is no state agency or organization that says, okay, yeah, I have a vacancy, come, I'll take you. No, their staff is filled. And these families were left with no income, basically. Yeah. And it's hard. It's really hard, especially given that food prices are growing. All of the food prices in the markets, they refer to the black market dollar rate, which is also growing. So life is becoming more and more difficult for the ordinary Turkmen.
And on the top of that, we have the COVID-19. And earlier Bruce was talking about that. I mean, how countries dealing with it, although they still keep saying that it's not relevant for Turkmenistan, but you guys are, talking to people on the ground, how they are coping with this, how serious of an issue it become.
Well, the interesting thing is that we haven't been hearing lately about great numbers of patients in the hospitals, or the messages that we received, for example, last summer or even in December 2020. It seems that things have calmed down with COVID. At least, up until now, we have confirmed 55 cases. Some of them were doctors. So the situation today is not comparable to what there was let's say in August or July last year, or even in December last year. Because we do have sources, we do have people who monitor the situation precisely, the COVID situation. And frankly speaking, we haven't been hearing any alarming messages from them. The situation in hospitals is more or less okay. They have started to vaccinate the elderly in the regions. They use the Chinese vaccine for that. And in a few weeks' time, we will be releasing a report about the COVID situation in Turkmenistan, giving the chronology of the events when the pandemic hit the world, how Turkmenistan's government's reaction was, what they did, what they did not do, and up until today, what's happening with COVID. So,
okay. Also,
if I may aid, Mohammed, I think Ruslan is right, and they more or less contained the spread of the virus due to strict lockdown. They stopped international flights, and there is no interaction with the outside world. But this is having the economic impact to Turkmenistan. This complete shutdown from outside world is having a severe influence on the worst situation in the country.
Yeah, that's
the
what
worst in the past 30 years.
That's what I was thinking about. I mean, when we talk about Uzbekistan, for example, I mean, that country, to some level, become like a self-sufficient, at least on the basic level, to the extent that they could address their local needs with the products that are grown locally. In Turkmenistan, though, it's not the case, I guess. So the borders closed.
That's because you cannot compare pre-COVID situation in Turkmenistan and Uzbekistan. Like Uzbekistan had its difficulties pre-COVID, but they were not amidst the worst economic crisis since those countries gained independence.
Yeah.
But still, for Uzbekistan, Uzbekistan also got really hit really bad because the President Mirziyoyev, himself acknowledged last week that the coronavirus pandemic left the country in deep economic troubles.
No, what I was trying to say by comparing with Uzbekistan is like Turkmenistan, it's not certainly self-sufficient in terms of the daily commodities that the country needs. So borders closed for so long already. I'm guessing that it must have affected the trade, right? I mean, things that comes in and things that goes out. I mean, one thing is that you don't have money to buy anything. The other thing is, even if you do have money, are things available? Ruslan, would you like to respond to this question?
Well, in the bazaars, for example, bazaars are still full. You can still find things, you can still find imported things, but they're expensive indeed. One thing is that, the availability of those goods, but the other thing is the people's purchasing power. There is no purchasing power, or almost no purchasing power. Only a small layer of the Turkmen society can afford doing grocery shopping in supermarkets or in bazaars. There is a segment of population, it's very small, that doesn't even probably know about the existence of state stores and all those 4 a.m. queues for sugar and chicken quarters. However, for the majority of population, the items sold on bazaars, the imported stuff, are not simply available. And when the exchange rate was really jumping the other week, increasing, adding another manat or even 2 daily, those shops, they would close, and retype their price tags. They would fix their price tags according to the changing exchange rate. So things are getting more expensive, yes. And what is true is that for the majority of population, these items are not available, and they still have to rely on the state stores and state supply.
So, Bruce, that is what we are talking about in terms of the day-to-day suffering of the people under current circumstances. And since the economy was hit badly by the COVID, by all these failed policies that Turkmen authorities are trying to implement, the state economy must have also shrunk and must be suffering, must be going through tough times. And what I'm thinking about is there a thing called an economic collapse of the state? I mean, it is crazy that I'm even asking this question, but is it a thing?
Well, I mean, I suppose, in theory, of course, and I'm sure there have some economies, if you looked at history, have crashed hugely and had big problems. The question is whether they have the resources to kind of bounce back from this, and in Turkmenistan's case, they haven't invested in a lot of export routes. I mean, some, without a doubt, but I mean, their economy is based on pipelines to carry their gas out. And, one of those pipelines isn't pumping any gas and one is pumping very little. And even their main pipeline, the one that goes to China, is also reduced volumes, but still pumping. Like I said, when you have an economic slump, you count on a comeback based on your ability to produce all kinds of goods and sell them off. But after all these years, Turkmenistan has a limited number of goods that it exports besides gas. Still very, very limited. So how do you bounce back from an economic downturn? what can you ramp up production of, or find new efficiencies so you can produce cheaper and compete on the international market? And most of their products are either petroleum or hydrocarbon based products.
Wow.
So there's not much to fall back on and count on resurrecting itself later and going.
Yeah.
They're stuck with the contracts they got and stuck with the export routes they have.
That brings me to the phone conversation that he was engaged in over the last 1 week, Bruce. I mean, could the economy be the thing that he might be talking to those leaders about? I mean, no regional leader, no regional country would like Turkmenistan to drag them into some unexpected situations there. So could the economy be one of the topics that necessitated those phone calls with the regional leaders? And when I think about that, one other thing comes to my mind is then if the economy is the thing, why he was talking to Rahman or President Ghani, but I just wondered.
A lot of these countries aren't in such great economic shape that they could help that much, even if they wanted to. And of course, whether they want to or not, it's a big question. And I should mention that I see that the Uzbek president is in Turkmenistan today.
Yeah.
So that's interesting to then wonder what he's talking about. Now, he's shown that he's willing to at least publicly say he'll give money to other countries to help him out. And maybe that's part of what this visit is. But again, like I said, Uzbekistan doesn't have a lot of money to spend. They have their own problems, and they need the money they have to completely overhaul their own power infrastructure for one thing, since it almost totally failed at times this last winter. We know that Turkmenistan's been fishing around to try to get loans from international financial organizations like the IMF or somebody like that. But that said, the IMF really just amazingly didn't accept Turkmenistan's economic figures. Turkmenistan's been saying for years, we got GDP growth up, double digits for a long time. But even this last year with COVID, they said, no. We still had all this growth. And for the first time, the IMF said, we have a different figure that's much lower. And the Asian Development Bank put a qualifier after that saying that, in fact, I don't think they published records. They didn't publish any GDP figures for Turkmenistan because they said they couldn't get any reliable figures for it. So, their bad reputation is catching up with them in a lot of ways.
Yeah. Also, we need to really conclude the discussion. Okay, let's do it with kind of final question. As we all discussed today, Turkmenistan's economy is really in serious trouble, and politically they are in the deadlock. And let's see what comes out of these discussion about the succession. But what I'm thinking about is how the country can get out of this situation. And in the meantime, there's no solution. There isn't any policy proposals in the horizon which would indicate that the authorities are working on something. So the final question being, so what's next? Where your eyes will be to determine where the country is headed after this stage? Let's start with you, Farouk, then Ruslan, and then Bruce.
I think the Turkmen regime, president of Turkmenistan and his family, they are not as much worried about economic situation as about the future of the family in power. They are more preoccupied with transitioning of the power. And about the economy, I think this family, and because when we talk about the regime and the government, we talk about the family because everything is subordinate to the wish of Berdimuhamedov, and now his son as he's stepping in. They are incapable of managing the economy of the country. I mean, the only way the country can come out of this economic troubles is giving some freedom to people. That's not only economic freedoms, but also the political freedoms and respect for the human rights, because everything is interconnected. Without political freedoms and political reforms, there won't be any economic reforms possible.
Right.
About when we talk about the transition of power, we would, to your question, what we should look at. We will have to look at what happens in the next few months. Berdimuhamedov, during the talk with Putin, already said that Deputy Prime Minister will represent Turkmenistan in the Caspian Summit. So you can imagine that Putin, Rouhani, Kassym-Jomart Tokayev, and Ilham Aliyev, they will be talking with Serdar Berdimuhamedov, not Gurbanguly Berdimuhamedov himself in August when the summit will take place. So this is coming into a decisive stage, this political power transfer, but that means means that the economy is going to face tougher challenges.
Yeah, right. Okay, thank you, Farouk. Ruslan and Bruce, really briefly, in terms of where your eyes will be to determine where the country is headed after this stage, in the context of what we have discussed today, the economy and the political transition that many of you have said might be in order behind all these developments.
To be very brief, I can say that there's no bright future, the coming nearest future with this regime, with this type of ruling, with this type of management. I agree with Farouk that freedoms and rights and some economic relief are all important components for change, for positive change, but also Turkmenistan is corrupt from up to down. They really need to fight corruption. They really need to reform entire industries. For example, Bruce was speaking about oil and gas products, but cotton is Turkmenistan's, one of the largest export items. They could be making billions or millions, or hundreds of millions on it if the situation with forced labor did not exist, if farmers were paid decently. But because of their policy, because of this system of forced labor, hardly anybody in the world is buying that. So they're killing the economy themselves, basically. Only reforms and only fight against corruption will give some light at the end of the Turkmen tunnel.
Very interesting. Oh, wow. Bruce, it's always difficult to talk about Turkmenistan and not to be pessimistic, but this is turning out to be one of those debates where ending the conversation with positive note might be very, very challenging. But just on that, Bruce, we have seen and people have seen Senior Berdimuhamedov to be the worst example of mismanaging a country. What I'm saying is, in case of any of the scenarios that we have been talking about today in terms of the possible succession, even though the successor might end up being Junior Berdimuhamedov, still wouldn't this be a good thing for the country? Wouldn't people think this to be something positive, at least some change from the previous leader who has been seen like source of many, many problems that this country is going through?
I think it's impossible to end a conversation about Turkmenistan on a bright note. It just doesn't happen. I mean, I've wondered all the time if that wasn't the easiest solution for them to get out of this. Even if, Ruslan had said earlier that it's not just the family, it's the regime. And certainly there are people that are propping this guy up and helping him out. And they might actually be the real power behind the scenes. You wonder if this guy, he doesn't appear to be a capable diplomat, statesman, or financial manager at all. But if you change the face, then you can do a lot, and you only have to look at Uzbekistan to see that. You had, and really even with Berdimuhamedov, when he showed up too, there was a lot of hope. After Niyazov died, Berdimuhamedov showed up and said a lot of the right things about reforms he was going to do, and it's a lot like what happened in Uzbekistan when Karimov died, and Mirziyoyev shows up and makes a lot of statements about reforms he's going to make, and that, if nothing else, that buys you time and renews hope among the people that maybe something's going to happen for the better. And I've wondered if things, I keep thinking Turkmenistan's hit rock bottom, but the government seems to find new depths after that. But sooner or later, you got to get to the point where a lot of the people in power realize the only way that they're going to hold on to power is to ditch the guy at the top somehow. Yeah. and at least, everyone celebrates, because let's face it, I mean, I've talked to people that have been inside Turkmenistan recently or have relatives there or something like that. And you get the same message every time that generally the people hate Gurbanguly Berdimuhamedov. I mean, they just hate him, and I think that's increasingly a problem. I don't know how long you can count on the fact that your security forces are going to be able to keep that from spilling over and blowing up.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you very much, Bruce. Bruce Pannier, the editor of Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberties Central Asia blog Qishloq Owazi. Also, big thanks to Ruslan Matiev, the editor of Alternative Turkmenistan News, and Farouk Yusufi, the director of Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberties Turkmen Service. Thank you, colleagues, again for your time and thoughts today. And this is from me, Mohammed Tahir, Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberties media manager and host of the Majlis podcast here in Washington, D.C. Until next week, bye-bye.